You tear open a small paper packet. You pour the white crystals into your morning coffee. You watch them disappear into the dark liquid before you even take a sip. It is a mindless habit. It is something your body craves, something your brain expects, and something you can buy for a few cents almost anywhere on Earth. But this tiny white crystal carries a dark history. To understand why, you have to go back to a time when sweetness was almost impossible to find. For most of human history, your ancestors experienced sweetness only by rare, lucky accident. They might find a honeycomb hidden in a tree or stumble upon a patch of ripe wild berries. Sweetness was nature's signal for dense, safe energy. Your brain evolved to reward you for finding it, flooding your system with dopamine so you would remember exactly where that fruit tree was. But sweetness was fleeting. It was scarce, and for thousands of years, there was no such thing as isolated pure sugar. And this is where the story begins to shift. Around 10,000 years ago on the island of New Guinea, people discovered a tall, thick species of grass. If you broke the tough outer stalk and chewed on the fibrous inside, it released a liquid that tasted impossibly sweet. This was wild sugarcane. For centuries, it was just a local plant, chewed raw, sometimes used in religious rituals, but it could not be stored and it could not be easily transported. It was not until the plant made its way to India that human beings learned how to hack it. Around the time of the Gupta Empire, Indian chemists figured out how to extract the juice from the cane and boil it down until it formed hard, brown crystals. They called these crystals khanda, which is the ancient root of the word candy. This was a technological breakthrough. For the first time in human history, sweetness could be packaged, carried, traded, and kept for months without rotting. But even then, sugar was not food. It was a marvel. It was a potent medicine. When Arab traders brought sugar to the Middle East, they refined the boiling process, creating a purer, whiter crystal. They treated it like a pharmaceutical, prescribing it for fevers and stomach ailments. By the time European crusaders encountered sugar in the Middle East, they had no idea what they were looking at. They called it sweet salt, and when they brought tiny amounts of it back to Europe, it sparked an obsession that would eventually reshape the entire globe. Now, you might think that people immediately started baking cakes and sweetening their tea, but that is not quite true. In medieval Europe, sugar was so rare and so astonishingly expensive that it was treated like gold or diamonds. It was locked inside heavy wooden spice cabinets. Wealthy noblemen would serve a single lump of sugar on a silver platter to impress their guests. Kings would have sculptures made of pure sugar centerpieces just to show off their vast wealth and power. To eat sugar was to consume the ultimate status symbol. It was proof that you were elite. So what changed? Why is this luxury item now sitting on the table of every diner in the world? This is where the story turns darker. As the demand for sugar exploded among the European elite, the supply could not keep up. Sugarcane is a notoriously difficult crop to grow. It requires massive amounts of water, intense tropical heat, and grueling, back-breaking physical labor to harvest before the cane rots in the sun. Europe did not have the climate for it. So European powers began looking outward. When Christopher Columbus sailed on his second voyage in 1493, he brought sugarcane cuttings to the island of Hispaniola. The climate of the Caribbean was absolutely perfect for growing cane, but there was a problem. Harvesting it and processing it was deadly. To turn sugarcane into the white crystals Europeans craved, the thick stalks had to be chopped down by hand under a blistering sun. Then the cane had to be immediately crushed in massive, heavy rollers to extract the juice. The juice was then transferred to a boiling house where it had to be continuously stirred in massive copper vats over raging fires. The heat was unbearable. The work was terrifying. It was an early, brutal form of industrial manufacturing taking place in the middle of a tropical jungle. No one would willingly do this work for a standard wage. And so, to keep the sugar flowing and the prices dropping, European empires turned to mass human exploitation. They built the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of enslaved African people were stolen from their homes, shipped across the ocean, and forced to work on massive sugar plantations in Brazil, the Caribbean, and the Americas. The wealth generated by these sugar colonies was staggering. It built the grand port cities of Europe, funded massive navies, and laid the financial foundation for modern global trade. But the human cost was incomprehensible. The life expectancy of an enslaved person on a sugar plantation was terrifyingly short. Sugar was literally paid for in blood, and if that sounds like distant history, it should. But the economic system built by sugar never really went away. It just shifted its shape. By the 19th century, the massive output of these plantations finally caused the price of sugar to crash. It was no longer a luxury for kings. It was cheap, and it arrived at the exact moment the world was changing again. The Industrial Revolution was sweeping across Europe. Millions of people were leaving their farms to work brutal, 14-hour shifts in loud, dangerous factories. These workers were exhausted, underpaid, and poorly fed. They could not afford meat or fresh vegetables. But they could afford sugar. And they could afford tea. This is the part most people never hear. Sweetened black tea became the ultimate fuel of the industrial working class. It was hot, it provided a caffeine rush, and the massive dose of sugar provided an instant spike of cheap calories. It killed their hunger and gave them just enough energy to survive another brutal shift at the loom or the coal mine. Sugar had completely reversed its role in society. It went from being the ultimate luxury of the ultra-rich to the cheapest survival fuel of the urban poor. So by the time this reaches your life today, the world has been completely rewired by this tiny white crystal. The massive agricultural systems built to harvest it never stopped running. They just became more efficient. Today, sugar is no longer locked in a spice cabinet. It is hiding everywhere. You walk into a modern grocery store and you are surrounded by it. It is baked into your sandwich bread to make it softer. It is pumped into your pasta sauce to hide the taste of cheap tomatoes. It is in your salad dressing, your yogurt, your breakfast cereal, and your ketchup. The food industry figured out long ago that if they add a little bit of sugar to almost anything, your ancient evolutionary biology will kick in. Your brain, still thinking you are wandering the wild looking for a rare piece of fruit, will reward you with a hit of dopamine. You will buy that product again. You will crave it without knowing why. But beneath that simple habit is a much older story. We took an ancient survival instinct and turned it into a massive vulnerability. We took a rare plant and built global empires to extract it. We traded human lives to make it cheap. And now, we consume it in such massive quantities that it has become the leading driver of chronic disease, obesity, and metabolic failure in the modern world. The cost of sugar has merely shifted. It is no longer paid by the people forced to harvest it. It is paid by the bodies of the people consuming it. You look down at your cup. You stir the spoon. You watch the white crystals dissolve and disappear into the dark. And for a moment, you realize that the most ordinary thing in your kitchen is not ordinary at all. It is a piece of hidden history, quietly waiting to be swallowed.